Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Brehon Academy. Tonight, we're going to be having a conversation with another one of the Brehon Academy administrators. That's Olivia Wylie. Olivia has been helping me with the Brehon Academy now for about 2 years, and she is responsible for the really beautiful artwork, the unique pieces of art that go up on the Brehon Academy Facebook page, most notably about the ancient tree alphabet, the Ogham alphabet, and the Triads of Ireland, which were these insightful pieces of wisdom that were given in the form of a kind of a haiku, and more recently on the judgments of the High King, King Cormac. Olivia has produced some beautiful works to help connect people with ancient Ireland. And we're going to spend about half an hour, 40 minutes just chatting with Olivia about her passion, her interest, why she does the work that she does. If you'd like to get access to one of Olivia's books for review, stay tuned till the end of the video, and I'm going to give you details so you can get yourself a copy of Roots Insights from the Irish Ogham Tree Alphabet. Okay, Olivia, thanks so much for agreeing to speak with me again. We had a conversation like this several months ago, and somehow I lost a file, and it was an amazing conversation, and I was kicking myself. This is an idea that I've wanted to do for a while, is to have guests on the Brehon Academy, people who have deep knowledge to share about ancient Ireland. And Olivia is somebody who has helped me with the Brehon Academy now for a couple of years. And I wanted Olivia to be the first person featured on this kind of new format. So Olivia, thanks so much again for giving me your time. I know it's very early where you are.
Jigwitch, I'm so excited to be on.
Great. So last time we spoke, we covered quite a lot. But I want you to kind of share with people your kind of passion for Ireland. And it really comes across when you speak, and especially in your work. And kind of like, where did that begin for you? Because I can tell by your accent, you're not like Irish. You didn't live in Ireland. You didn't grow up in Ireland, but it's clearly something that Ireland and Irish history and heritage is clearly something that's very close to your heart. And how did that happen?
You're very right. I'm an Irish American, but I was raised by a gentleman who was from Donegal, and my great grandfather, we called him Shanda. He taught us all. I have 27 first cousins, so when I say all, I mean all. He taught all of us young ones about our heritage and about our stories. He came over on the boat. The family story is that his mother and his aunt were herb women, and then an English doctor moved into the town next door and accused his mother of poisoning an 83-year-old woman. And she'd been giving the woman mint leaves. So the family story is we got run out of town.
Mm-hmm.
So they took the boat, and my Shanda landed and couldn't find work anywhere. So he kept going west, and he ended up in Wisconsin in a logging camp. And that was Kishena, which is where I grew up. And the story goes that he met his wife, my great grandma, when he hit his leg with his own axe. And as he was lying in the hospital of the day, a lovely young Menominee woman came over and checked on him and said, "Hit yourself with your own axe, didn't you?" And he looked up at her and said, "I aim better with the ladies." And being my great grandmother, she looked down and said, "Work on the axe." And that was how they met. And that's how our family got together. But yeah, my Shanda told us all the old tales. He taught us the Book of Invasions. Of course, he taught us first by teaching us these very rousing stories that he would tell himself, and having kitchen parties at our house where he and his sons and daughters would play instruments, and all of us kids would dance around. And so I grew up with this strong sense that we were from somewhere else, that we were exiles. And so the older I got, the more I wanted to understand that song and that story, but also that loneliness that was always in my great-grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
and that sense of something missing. So I had grown up speaking Ashwelga a little bit, but it was very clumsy. It was more of a memory of the language. So I really wanted to engage more. So I started studying in my late teens, early 20s, and getting more into the research. And as I was studying the language, I was studying the poetry of Ireland, and I was studying the deeper stories that understanding the language let me into.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I studied, the more I thought, it's heartbreaking that more people don't know this. This is beautiful. This is wonderful. Why is it that everyone knows, say, um, excuse me, say Rumi's poems, or who am I trying to think of? Twice Told Tales,
Mm-hmm.
but not these beautiful works from Ireland. So as I got older, I started illustrating these works and taking translations done by Kuno Meyer and later translators, and saying, these need to be more accessible if people are going to see that inner beauty. So I
Mm-hmm.
started taking those works and reinterpreting them, translating them, and illustrating them, at first for my own learning, but more and more as a chance to share with others.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to, I wonder if you have any like opinion why it might be that we know the poems of Rumi, or there's like so many books and documentaries, for example, on the pyramids of Egypt, or
Mhm.
we know about the Greek pantheon and the Roman pantheon of mythology, but so little is known of Irish heritage and mythology. Do you have any like theories why that might be, apart from the obvious, we were colonized, of course?
Yeah, I have a couple of theories, and one is the obvious. We were colonized, and it was easier to say, oh, that's uncouth, because then you could dismiss it. But also, it wasn't, I'm going to be blunt here, it wasn't exotic enough, because far off Egypt, in
Hmm.
Egypt, the people native to that land were treated as badly as the people of Ireland were, but it was far enough away to be interesting and exotic. And when people were looking at their own backyard, they didn't see the wonder in it. They didn't see the beauty in it. And given that our next door neighbors were our biggest enemies, they didn't want us to have that cachet of something beautiful and something powerful. That, and the Normans picked up from their colonizers, the Romans, the idea that Roman and Greek culture was the best, and they passed it along, so that each generation, unfortunately, was told the best thing is neoclassical Roman or Greek.
Yeah.
And now, as a modern culture, we are still trying to overcome that. I went to a very small rural school in Colorado for my high school, is what we call it in America. I think, I'm not going to try
Secondary,
to tell you.
we would
Secondary.
call it secondary school, but
Mhm.
most of the audience is American. That's a little
Yes,
factoid that you might not have known. Like most of the audience watching this would be American,
wonderful.
which is
Well, then,
great. Which is great.
then there won't be a problem
Yeah.
there. And I noticed that we were taught the Greek stories, and my teacher was actually pretty progressive, so she tried to teach some of the Irish stories as well. But she couldn't pronounce a single name in any of the stories. And I actually quietly approached her after class, and I said, I grew up with these stories. Can I tell you how to pronounce the
Wow.
names of the characters?
Good job. I mean, it is hard. I even have difficulty when I'm reading some of these stories, especially the older names that don't exist anymore. The
Yes.
brain just doesn't know what to do with this combination of letters. So
Yes.
we can forgive. It's just a good thing that she was willing to share the stories, right?
Well, I was so happy that she was sharing anything.
Mm,
But, and like you said, it is not an easy language. I once asked my great grandfather, Shanda, why are all the words like this? And of course, he was talking to a 9-year-old. So he said, well, little one, we borrowed this language from the She, so it's hard for people to understand, but you have to keep studying.
Mhm.
So he told me that the language was borrowed from the fair folk.
Fairies. That's amazing. And what was like, how did you deal with that as a 9-year-old? Like, how did your 9-year-old mind process that?
I nodded and smiled and said, all right, because I'd grown
Hmm.
up with so many stories of the fair folk and the She that essentially for me, they were just a part
They're
of
real.
everyday life. It was like hearing about Tirnanog was a lot like hearing about
Hmm.
Chicago. You didn't go there. That wasn't a place for you, but
Wow.
you knew it existed. And that was I
Hmm.
I think I got a taste as a young person of what our ancestors must have experienced, where the the mythical world and the real world were reflections of one another and connected
Hmm.
in a way that I think the modern world tells us can't happen. And I learned that two things could simultaneously be true. One could be factual and one could be true. So I understood all of the science I was learning in school, but I also understood that in spirit, the stories I grew up with were true. And that has helped shape me as an adult. It's made me more flexible in my thinking, although still, as you said, not completely flexible enough to look at a word like wetch and be able to pronounce it off the top of my head when I'm
Mm.
reading it. My reading is still not where I would like it to be. Ashgwelga. Yeah, I stare at a lot of words and go, oh dear.
Hmm. Well, I mean, just this is something that Irish people struggle with their whole lives as well. And so to meet somebody who even like spent some effort to learn the language and has some of the language that isn't in Ireland, it's kind of a rare thing, and it's a great thing because it's in speaking that it lives. Laurigi me,
Exactly.
oh Laurigi me. That's as the poem says, speak me, oh speak
Exactly.
me.
Well, I will tell you, my impetus was not as honorable as it should have been. When my Shanda was angry, he would switch into Irish to curse. And I
Okay,
wanted to know what he was saying. So I
very
kept
good.
insisting that he would teach me the language. And he died when I was 12. And then it
Mm.
was on me to learn by myself. But it's been a funny journey because there are many words that were used in my household that I understood in context, but not exactly as they were
Mhm.
meant. So my uncles, my great uncles, my grandma's brothers, would poke their heads out the door when we were all playing in the backyard and yell "ara!" And
Ara.
to us,
Mm.
I thought that meant get inside, and it did in our household. But it took me years to learn that meant attention. And when I first started studying, I had to learn that Guramagat is 4 words because I thought it was one long word because that's how
Mhm.
you say it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a funny a series. It was actually American Irish American comedian, but he grew up in Ireland. I think he was like he moved here when he was 11 or 12. Des Bishop, and he actually went to the Gaeltacht for 6 months to learn the language, and the whole it's like a reality TV series following him and the journey of this. And his mission was to do stand up in Irish. That was his mission by the end of this six
Wow.
months. And he's first learning the Irish through listening and speaking, as you do just in conversational. And then it eventually comes to when he is writing and he's like, Will. I knew Will on Will. I was using Will all the time. And then suddenly I saw Will and I thought, Will, I would have never put an F inside you,
Yes.
Because like you look at these words, it's like he says it's like the Irish wanted to make a language that like the English could never read. So they
Yes.
made it as hard as possible. But we both know that the Irish was there first.
Yep.
But yeah, it's
And
a
that's
tricky one to read.
when I always go back to what Shanda taught me. We borrowed it from the Dinashi. Oops.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's why humans can't read it well.
Yeah. I'd like to go back to what you were saying about Kuno Meyer. maybe for people who don't know who he is, you could like tell us a little bit about who he is and the work that he did and how it inspired you in your own work.
Of course. Kuno Meyer was a German researcher who was working in the 1890s through the 1900s. And he was the first philologist, language student, and researcher who looked at Old Irish triads, which is a seminal form of poetry in the Irish language, which posits a concept at the start of the poem and then three qualities of the concept throughout the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Kuno Meyer is wonderful because he was the first one who looked at these poems and said, they're closer to haiku than they are to Western poetry of his day. And he essentially looked at it and said, why does everyone keep trying to turn it into doggerel? It's not doggerel. So he cut away a lot of the translation mistakes that were made by earlier philologists and got down to the beautiful, clean lines of Irish poetry, which does have more of a shape, reminiscent of haiku to modern readers. That's what we have seen most often that looks like Irish poetry. And Kuno Meyer was also someone who was more interested in understanding the cultural context than in making it fit his concept. He wanted to know what the original writers meant, not what his culture would find acceptable,
Mm-hmm.
which was beautiful because if you look at translators before him, you cringe as a modern reader. They are turned into very Victorian doggerel,
Yep.
So rhyming couplets, and they almost read like there was a young lady from one of those poems.
Yeah,
and they're
limericks.
they're very much limericks. They're painful to read. And Kuno Meyer took that work and made it clean and beautiful again. So he did a lot of translation work with some of the oldest stuff we've got, the Danish Kedas, the pretty much everything that had survived the medieval era, he would work with. And he got down into the bone and the marrow of those old works, which is why I am so attracted to his work.
Mm-hmm.
And later people like Thomas Cleary have built upon what Kuno Meyer did. But Kuno Meyer is the trailblazer. He is if you're going to try to understand these old pieces, he's the one to look to. And I bumped into him partly because I had grown up with the tradition of a lot of the stories, and then I got out in the world. And as anyone who studies Irish culture knows, especially in America, but I'm sure it's happening around the world, there's a lot of new age stuff pasted on top of the stories. And a lot of times people will say, ancient wisdom says, well, by nature, I'm a researcher. So I say, what ancient wisdom? Where are you drawing this from?
Where does it come from? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't have a lot of patience for ancient wisdom commentary because I want to hold the manuscript in my hands myself and read at least a translation. I will often start with translations because I don't completely trust my personal translation abilities. And I'd rather have someone who this is their field, and then I can work from there.
Yeah.
But finally, someone said Kuno Meyer and started saying, the Danish Kedas, the Book of the Dun Cow. And so I finally got my hands on transcripts of the manuscripts.
Yeah.
Started being able to actually look at this information and strip away some of that, I call it fluffy bunny stuff on top, but that airy-fairy, the ancient wisdom. No, our ancestors weren't walking around the forests wearing white robes every day. They were people who lived in a forest. They were people who worked fields and lived in
their habitat. Yeah.
Yeah, this was their home. This was their nature. They weren't, let me put it this way, they weren't floating around on crystal palaces. They lived in the land and with the land. And so I wanted to understand that deeper resonance where people who were sharp-eyed and depended on this land for survival on a daily basis understood the world. And so once I got down to Kuno Meyer's work, I started reading this information and it started making sense. It helps that my professional studies are in horticulture. So as I'm reading translations of some of the works revolving around the Brehon laws and the Ogham, I'm reading this and starting to grin more and more because it's common sense agriculture. Don't cut down the most mature trees because those are the ones that provide food for 100 people. But make sure you cut the ivy because the ivy will strangle everything else. So in the Brehon laws, there are basically laws of forestry, laws of animal care, laws of land care that kept the land healthy and sustainable and kept it growing. And we were the people who cared for the land itself and helped it be its best. You don't have to fight the land if you work with it. You do better.
People now saying, people who look into this field now saying that they were like the first green movement or the first ecologists. You could have found them in early Ireland, and I think there's a lot to be said in the Ogham, and I'm going to pick your brain on that now in a moment. But just on the triads, could you tell us a little bit about your work, which I think is, I've read Kuno Meyer. I know the triads. They're not the easiest thing to approach, especially from him, because it's like more academic, right? It's more, it's philological research. But what you have done is, well, maybe you can tell us what you've done and how you've collected them into, you've made them into collected them into groups and illustrated these in your work.
Of course. So this was originally a project that I started working on, devoted to my cousins, my younger cousins who might, like you said, have trouble stripping away all of the airy-fairy nonsense and getting down into the academic stuff. And the academic stuff, I will admit freely, it is not fun. It is kind of miserable to go through. So what I did was create an illustrated collection of the Triads of Ireland. So I simply call it the Triads of Ireland, a collection. And each triad is chosen in volume 1 as something that is easily accessible. And I've broken it into life, learning, and leadership. So I'm hoping to do 3 volumes comprising all the triads eventually. But volume 1's the most accessible. It's triads that you can see the wisdom in today. And they date from the 9th century. Some of the language and some of the concepts are difficult. So in the back of the book, I discuss the text of each triad, and then I describe where I got the objects that I used for the illustrations from. So if I used a stone from County Cavan as the concept for the illustration I created for that triad, I will name the stone, name where it is, and name the museum it's in the back of the book. And I essentially wanted to do an Irish version of those cute Rumi and Aesop's Fables books you see everywhere that make Rumi's work or Aesop's work, which neither of those are all that accessible either, very accessible and very readable in short snippets. And because of the style of Irish poetry, it lends itself towards this. And I should say the old Irish style.
I want to say that, like, one of the things I love about this work is how you have combined the poetry, the art, and that alone. If that's all it was, it would be amazing. It's beautiful. You read these triads, and it invokes some feelings, it invokes thoughts, but it's also an academic work because you have cited everything. You're using the academic materials from Kuno Meyer. You're citing like where these objects are, and so it's like it's more than just a poetry book. It's a book of education that helps somebody to connect to, first of all, the wisdom, let's say, of these writings, but also, like, in a deeper sense, the nature of Ireland at the time, to try and like tune into who are the people who believed these things and who were the people who said these things. I wonder if you have any favorite triads that you refer to most often, or that come to mind when you're asked about it.
I think one of my favorites is one that actually was used as a warning in my household, and it was, what does a fool do? Blows out his cheeks, blows out his belly, blows out his money purse. And it's worded much more gracefully in the triads themselves. But I love the fact that through the generations, that was passed down even to my great grandfather, who was, born relatively recently. I mean, he died at 100, and the culture remembered that particular piece. But I think one of my other favorites is my favorite because it has a sly humor in it. And it runs, three things constitute a physician: a blameless cure. I'm forgetting the rest, I apologize, but it ends with a painless examination. And you essentially get this sly humor in the work that you get a strong sense that someone is saying, yeah, I prefer the doctor who doesn't poke and prod me too much.
Yeah. The one who doesn't have cold hands or something like, yeah.
Yes, or stab me with a needle. And a lot of the triads have, many of them are meant to be lessons, but many of them have an oblique sense of humor to them.
Yeah. But it's funny that like we can see the sense of humor in them all this time later. That, like, to think that back in early Ireland, they also had doctors with cold hands, or doctors who poked and prodded too much. And that's why these triads are so interesting, I think. And you said it, but particularly the collection that you've put together, they are accessible to our modern world. They still have a relevance, and there's a lot to be learned from them. Yeah. You said earlier that you had some. I'd like to just try and track a little bit here. Sure. You have some herbal women in your family. Mm-hmm. And I believe this is something that has passed on as well to you. You work as a horticulturist. You're working with plants. That's like your main work. And you mentioned the Ogham here, and I wonder if we could just like open that door and see what's behind it. Your relationship to the plants and the knowledge there, and how that connected to you learning about the Ogham. And I guess like realizing that this ancient alphabet existed with this plant knowledge, what was that like for you when you discovered it?
And I'd be happy to talk about that. It's actually where I started my formal writing in this field, because I'd started an essay series as a lesson for myself. There were a number of books I'd read, some of which were good, some of which I essentially put down halfway through and said, this is New Age nonsense. Yeah. This is not worth reading.
There's a lot of that in the Ogham, unfortunately. Like, and as an Irish person and an Irish researcher, isn't there a tendency, or like it's tempting to want to say that this is like true or it's accurate, that there's these like tree zodiacs, but
yes, the tree zodiacs.
But to stay true to the authenticity and the facts, you just have to throw that stuff away.
Exactly. And that was why I decided to set myself a challenge, which was to go through the Ogham and write an essay of my own based in solid research for each plant, and try to connect this very dry academic material from Kuno Meyer's translations mainly, and one or two other researchers, to what I knew of the plant world. Why did our ancestors make the alder the tree of the warrior, and specifically the tree of the defender? And as I started thinking about it and researching, each tree had what I think of as a light bulb moment, a wonderful moment of connection, where you would understand what our ancestors were trying to say and why. Because they were not academics, and they were not, let me say this bluntly, they were not writing something to sell to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
They
Good
were,
point. Very good point. Yeah.
yeah, this was information that they were living by. So the Ogham, for those who are new to it, it's a writing system based on a line drawn from the bottom to the top, and you read it from the bottom up, and it's cross hatches across a line, and each set of hatch marks is a letter. So with that in mind, children were taught you climb the Ogham as you climb a tree.
Mm-hmm.
And they were taught the way we teach our children. A is for apple, B is for ball. They were taught F is for birch, and so on. So they remembered everything contextually as, okay, we're climbing a tree. What kind of tree are we climbing? It's this tree. And each letter had cultural connotations. So going back to the alder, why is it the tree of the defender? Because when you cut alder wood, at first, it is bright white. But a moment after you cut it, just as if you'd cut your own hand, it turns red. And essentially, it became the tree that symbolized, I'm not looking for a fight, but if you start a fight with me, I will defend. And it became a
Wow.
charm to carry or make your shield out of alder wood in the days of the High Kings, especially in the 9th century and before. Alderwood was often incorporated in shields because it was a symbol of that deep protection. And it was a charm against losing your own blood because the tree had already given its blood. So these were very basic understandings, but they were also very ecologically intelligent understandings. So why is oak the tree of the chieftain and the tree of permanence? Because oak produces so much tannic acid, and the cells of the oak wood are so tiny that almost no bacteria can get in there, and the wood lasts forever.
Hmm.
And we
So,
still have, yeah.
Yes, so go on, and I'm fascinated. This is fascinating. I could listen to you speak about this all day. So, you're saying that it was giving this kind of like noble position among the trees, and that's what they were called, the nobles of the wood. The oak was because of its durability, because of its actual the physical properties of the tree itself.
The physical properties of the tree itself. Our ancestors were keen-eyed about their environment, and they realized that oak had certain properties, one of which is it lives pretty much forever unless you cut it, and then its wood lasts. This is somewhat, I want to give the caveat that this is somewhat subjective. I mean, our ancestors usually lived 280 if they were lucky, 260 normally. So a plant creating wood that lasted for 200 years, that's forever. But that said, we still have oak pieces that have lasted 9 centuries, which is close enough to forever. But yeah, each of these trees, our ancestors understood as personalities, not human personalities, but as individual beings that had qualities that were worthy of notice and remembrance. For example, ivy, gort, is the tree of growth. And what's wonderful is that in the Ogham, it's growth for good or growth for evil, because ivy is beautiful, it grows wonderfully, but if it gets a hold of another tree, it'll scramble up it and kill it. So they used it as the symbol of good growth, but also as the symbol of don't get too big for your britches, don't overreach your grasp. And so occasionally there are historical records of chieftain chalking gort on someone's horse or someone's wheels as a reminder, hey, you're getting overly ambitious, be polite. It was a warning that if you grow too fast, you will be cut back. Because one of the things that turns up about the ivy in the Brehon laws is that it is a shrub of the wood, and it is specifically recommended, cut the ivy, feed it to the kine. And it was good fodder for cattle in winter. I want to give the caveat, it's not the best fodder. I wouldn't feed it to cows in the modern world, but if it's
Yeah,
choice between no food and ivy, feed
because
it
the
to
ivy, if left untamed, it can be very destructive. So it's unusual. I mean, it bears pointing out that it would be unusual in the early law to say cut a plant, because most of the
yes.
time it's like don't cut the plant, or if you cut it, only take what you need and use all you take. And if you were to cut the limb of the tree, you had to cover it with some soil so it would be
Mhm.
healed and things like that. So when there's a word of wisdom to say, hey, with the ivy, maybe you should keep an eye on that. And then you have that organic material. They used everything. So whereas we might throw it into a composter or set it on fire today, they
Mhm.
would put it to use.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was just
And
kind of built into the culture.
exactly. And there were trees that were specifically, our ancestors figured out they do better when they're cut back. Willow is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I love the fact that this basic, not basic, this sophisticated understanding that started at a basic level of looking around the forest and saying, what does what? And it wasn't intentional. It was a product of living in the world and living with the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could learn a lot from that to stop fighting the world and work with it. I
Mm-hmm.
now live in Colorado, which is a very arid, very dry part of the United States. And I teach this, I own a landscaping business, and I now teach this to my customers. Don't plant things that are going to need constant care. Plant something that is adapted to this area,
Yeah.
and then you won't have to fight the land and worry about whether we're getting water this year, because this land was never meant to support what you're trying to grow. Well, the same thing happened when the English got to Ireland. They wanted to plant rolling swaths of wheat
Mm-hmm.
across the rolling downs. Well, the downs are boggy with water, and wheat likes drier soil. So they were wasting their energy, and they had made very unpleasant comments about Irish growing barley all the time. The thing is, barley doesn't mind the rain.
Yeah. I wonder, one of the trees that I'm interested in the Ogham, and I'd like to hear your knowledge on this, is the yew tree.
Yes.
My understanding of it is that it's a significant one because, well, we find it growing in graves today. Um, so I believe there's some connection with that, like what do they call it? Axis Monday, like between the
Yes.
two worlds, and something about, and correct me if I'm wrong, about the bark of it being poisonous, so it can't be eaten except by deers or something. So a deer can eat the bark, and that's why they were considered sacred. Now I could be wrong on that, so I'm prepared to be corrected. But just I'm interested to know your knowledge about the yew tree.
Of course. So the yew tree is the tree of death and rebirth,
Mm.
partly because of its growth habit. When the tree is getting sick, it will actually put a branch down into its own rotten trunk and sprout a new tree from its own trunk, or down into the soil
Wow.
around its own roots, and use itself as compost to grow a new tree. So essentially, it propagates itself clonally. But specifically what you were talking about, deer shouldn't eat you. Nothing should eat you, but they will eat it. So our
Mhm.
ancestors thought that they could.
Okay.
They kind of live on the die too, but it has a lot of taxum in it, which is now used to kill cancer cells. And it
Wow.
was, yeah, it's a wonderful chemical when used properly, but as you can imagine, if it kills cells, it's a
Mm-hmm.
poison quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the uses for yew tisane, so a tea made from the yew branches, was as a bug repellent, because you would sprinkle this around, say, costly cloth, so that insects who got a mouthful, well, they died, so they didn't eat all of your cloth. And you would put yew branches around items that you wanted to be protected from time. And partly that was symbolic, and partly it was chemical. Nothing's going to touch you because of the taxon. or the taxon.
It's actually mind-blowing, and I'm kind of a little bit envious of you and your journey, as you have gone like deep into all of these plants, and you said you had like the light bulb moment for all of them. And I wish we had enough time to actually go through every single plant and learn all the lessons of it. But I guess like people will have to buy your book if they want to learn more about the insights from the Ogham alphabet and the triads. Is it too soon? Is it a spoiler if we mention the other work that you're currently doing, the Cormac work with Cormac?
I would not say so. The goal of all of my work is to make this stuff more accessible and more reachable for everyday folks. So talking about all of that. So my next work is illustrating the Cesca Cormac, the councils of King Cormac MacArt. So his work has been translated more recently by Thomas Cleary. And if you're looking for an academic resource, I do recommend checking out. He just calls it the Councils of Cormac. I do recommend checking that out. But what I'm doing is an illustrated work on each of Cormac's councils. And what I love about this work is that under the very antiquated language, each poem begins with a young man named Cavre saying, "O Cormac, the grandson of Con."
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you know the stories, Cavre is Cormac's son. So he's essentially saying, "Hey, Dad, what about this?" and asking his father a set of questions. So if you understand that context, you understand this as a father teaching a son how to be a decent human being in a world populated by lots of different kinds of people, and teaching his son how to be a good leader, since he's going to lead men one day. And once you have that context in your mind, the whole project changes into one of a man leading his son through the world, teaching him, here's how you take care of your neighbors. Here's how you stand up to bullies. Here's how you do this. Here's how you do that. So I am taking illustrative impetus from Book of Kells and a lot of the medieval artwork, a lot of Celtic knotwork, and working it into a new illustrated piece. Originally, it was planned for this fall, but life and COVID has changed a lot of plans. So it'll be out in the spring. And Kevin, I'm also going to call out next year. We hope to have a Audible Ogham course through Brehon Law. I'll be narrating it. Again, we apologize to listeners because we've been hinting that things would happen for a long time, and life and COVID happened.
Let's just put it down to that.
I think a lot of things.
The ambition is definitely there. It's just like life has kind of gotten in the way this year. But there's a lot of great stuff in the pipeline. But for people who want to find your work, what's the best place to do it? Now I'm going to link everything in this under this video. You're an admin on the Brehon Academy page, so I feel so privileged that you post your work there, and people kind of get like exclusives to see this brand new beautiful artwork that you do. But if I want to get a copy of the books that you have, or I know you have an Oracle set as well, where's the best place where I can find more about your work?
Well, my work is sold through the Brehon Law Academy page, and then head over to Amazon and just type in my name, Olivia Wylie, W-Y-L-I-E. And beyond that, I'm also on Etsy under LeafingOutArt, and all of my works are also art prints over there. So if you want to be able to look up and be reminded to keep studying, get a picture of Hazel from the Ogham.
Yeah, I've seen your Etsy store as well. Like it's really beautiful because you have, obviously you can buy the books, but you can get like a mug with your favorite Ogham print on it, or pillowcases and things like that. So it's a really like interesting, creative way to show the Irish culture. They're great gift ideas as well. And I said this last time when we spoke, but I'm going to say it again. I think that what you have done is given real gift to Irish people. You, through your art and through your books and through your passion for Ireland, you have created these vessels that are really enjoyable and really accessible and beautiful to look at. So I want to thank you for all the work that you have done over the years, and I look forward to the work that we continue to do together into the future.
As do I. It's been wonderful working with you, and I'll just keep working on pieces that open the door to all these wonderful stories for folks. Because once the door is open, you realize how many beautiful things are in the Irish culture.
And just as maybe I'm curious to know what you think around why is this important today? Why should we talk about these things that are from 1,000 years ago, or are just like vestiges of, you know, old scraps of manuscripts? Why do you do this? Why is it important?
It's important to me for three reasons. One, it honors my family. It honors my past. And for those of us who are lonely and feel like exiles, this both teaches us why we have that deep loneliness in us, because we were exiled, and reconnects us. It starts to heal that wound in a very small way. The second is that these pieces, written as humans, were coming together in a new way at a new time. They get down to the blood and the bone of what it is to be a human being among other humans. So they strip away all of the politics and all of the fancy words that we put on things in the modern world. And it's as simple as, if you treat your people like this as a leader, you will fall, or your people will fall. Or it's as simple as, what is most beautiful in the world? The song of the linnet. It reconnects us with what's real in the world. And especially in a world that is so diffuse and digital, it's important to reconnect with what is real and what is most base is the wrong word, most integral to our humanity. And that is the way we interact with one another and the way we treat one another. And the third reason is simply that if the stories are not told, they are forgotten. So each generation has to find a way to tell stories, or they will be lost. And like I said, the other part of my family is Menominee. That's the tribe of Wisconsin. I come of two peoples who have suffered, but I am watching one lose its memory and lose its stories. And I'm watching the other, the Irish, remember their stories and reconnect. And so I hope to be a small part of that memory and that remembering, because I know what happens, and I've seen it. When nobody does this work, then nobody remembers. And that is a tragedy, because there's so much wisdom here that we need now.
And I think that is a perfect way to end this conversation. So Olivia, thank you again so much for your time.
Always.
Huge thank you again to Olivia for her time and for her insights. I really could have listened to her speak about the plants, the trees, and the knowledge that she has gleaned from her experience, from her research, and her hands-on work actually as a horticulturist. I could listen to that all day. But if you want to learn more about it, you can get access to her book, Roots, Insights from the Irish Tree Alphabet. I'm going to put Olivia's email in the description box, so you can send Olivia an email. Only 5 people, the first 5 people to email Olivia, she's going to send you a digital version of Roots, Insights from the Irish Tree Alphabet. So act quick, because this is probably going to go very fast. And I hope you enjoyed this format. It's something that I'm experimenting with, something a bit different. I'd like to do more of this. As I said at the start, I'd like to kind of open up the Brehon Academy more to the wider community of people who are Irish researchers or who are interested in these topics. So maybe you have a passion for Irish history or a particular aspect of Irish heritage that you'd like to talk about, or maybe you know somebody who would like to come on and have a chat with me and a cup of tea as we just talk about our shared interest in early Ireland and all the gems and wisdom and magic that it has to offer. I'd like to thank you for your time. Remind you to check out the website, brehonacademy.org. Check us out on Facebook. Like and subscribe, please, here on YouTube. We do have a store over on the website. If you want to go over there and buy some merchandise, help us out. That would be great, much appreciated. And you can also buy any of the online courses there, Early Irish Culture and Society, Irish Mythology, and the Brehon Laws of Early Ireland. Until next time, slán go fóill.